Stanford University.
All right, so welcome to Stanford CS193P, fall of 2013-14 academic year. This is our very first lecture, and we are going to be covering developing applications for iOS, specifically iOS 7. Today's lecture kind of has a first part and a second part. The first part is a little bit of logistics. The second part is I'm going to dive right into the course material because there's a lot to cover, and so I need to start covering it. So what will I learn in this course? I think you know what you're going to learn in this course. You're going to learn how to build cool apps, okay? iOS is a really cool platform for building apps. You probably already know that. The apps look cool. They've got animation. What's really cool is they're in your pocket, so you can whip them out and show them to your friends. You don't have to send them to a website or go get a computer. It's also really easy to develop really powerful apps in a really short amount of time. As you're going to find, this course is only 10 weeks long. And while this is Stanford, I know you're all really, really good programmers and all that, it's still 10 weeks is not a lot of time. So when we get to the end, you're going to see that it's a very leveraged platform for building things. And you know, the community is quite vibrant. Being able to distribute your apps via the App Store, not have to put them in a box and put them on a shelf in a store, is really a big, big difference when it comes to marketing a product. Okay, and you'll see that. The second thing you're going to learn in this course, though, is real-world application of a lot of the computer science things you're learning in other classes. Okay? So we're going to be doing networking. We're going to do multi-threaded. We're going to be doing all kinds of graphics. We're going to be doing animation. We're going to do object-oriented databases. We're going to do all that stuff for real. Okay? You're going to see what it looks like to apply all those computer science concepts, especially how to combine them into a real-world platform where you're making real apps. Okay? And quite a few, many dozens of my former students have shipped their apps on the App Store, and you may well too. Okay? So this is a good course to kind of combine or synthesize all the things you've learned in a lot of your other computer science classes and touch it up against the real world. Okay? The prerequisites for this class are super duper important. Okay? This is just key to make sure you have these prerequisites and really think long and hard if you don't, whether you want to give this class a go. CS106A and B or CS106X are absolutely required. Okay? If you don't have that or equivalent, definitely don't even think about it. The second requirement I've added this quarter based on experience is CS107 or CS108, which is great, by the way. If you've taken CS108, you'll really be ready for this class. Or even CS110. And part of the reason I'm requiring these extra classes is just so you're farther along the programming experience curve, because this class is a lot of programming. And so for those of you who are used to a lot of programming, you're used to it. But for those of you who aren't, it's kind of like, whoa, I got to do a lot of programming here. Okay, it's going to be a little unbalancing. So that's why I've required a little. Now, if you've done a summer internship or you've done some programming or something like that, that's definitely a substitute for CS107, 108, or 110, right? Or if you've done some other CS class that's even more advanced than these, that's fine too. You just got to understand that this class is, you know, a programming class, a lot of programming. And most importantly, you got to really be comfortable with object-oriented programming. Okay, so I put a bunch of terms up here like message and instance variable and superclass and subclass. If you don't know these terms like the back of your hand, it's going to be hard for you to get this class because I'm going to be throwing those terms out left, right, and center. iOS 7 is completely object-oriented. Okay, the whole structure of the design of the thing is object-oriented. So you just got to know that. And if you don't know that, you definitely want to go get that first. Okay, take CS106A and B equivalent first, and then get a little more programming experience, and then you're good to go. Okay, you're going to be writing apps in this class with dozens of classes that you're going to write by the 5th, 6th week. So, you know, if the biggest app you've ever written has got 3 or 4 or 5 classes in it, ooh, this is going to be a step up. Okay. The assignments. We got these weekly assignments for the first 6 or 7 weeks, and then you got a final project at the end. All the homework assignments have a detailed write-up of the required tasks and what we're evaluating you on. And they also have hints in there, because I'm not trying to make the homework assignments be really, really hard. And all the homework assignments also directly they're basically reinforcing what has been taught in lecture that week. They're not a bunch of random new stuff to learn. I'm a big believer in a teaching methodology, which is I'm going to tell you about a concept via slides. Then I'm going to show you it by demoing it to you, actually writing an application that does it. Then I'm going to ask you to do it on the homework. So that's 3 times you're going to see every single thing pretty much in this class. By the end of that, you're going to know how to do it, okay? And you're going to feel confident and experienced to do it. So the homework is all about that. It's about just doing what you saw me do in class and talk about in class and apply it. All right. Now I'm going to really briefly go over what's in iOS. I think most of you know what's in iOS. Hopefully you've all seen an iOS device or you have one in your pocket. I bet 90% of you do in this room. But I'm going to try and summarize it. This is really hard to do because I'm going to try and do it in 4 minutes or less or 5 minutes. And it's so big that, I mean, I could have 2 lectures where I just talk about all the different things and just summarize them. So this is just going to try and group them into some sort of sensible groups so you have an idea of what's there from a development standpoint. Then when we go off and start doing it all, then you'll start realizing, whoa, and once you learn how to look in the documentation, you'll see, oh, look at all that stuff in there, and you'll figure it out. So this is just a high-level overview. So I've used this division here into these 4 kind of groups. Core OS, which is the stuff that's close to the hardware. Core services, which is an object-oriented layer on top of that kind of makes it so you always are programming an object-oriented layer. Media, because these devices are basically iPods with a phone in them or with a big screen on them, but media is really important to these devices. And then finally, Cocoa Touch, which is the UI layer, okay, all the buttons and all the switches, things like that. So let's talk about what's in each of those layers, kind of, little skimming the surface of what's in those layers. At the Core OS layer, near the hardware, is a Unix kernel. Okay, this is a Unix operating system on this device. Okay, and BSD-based Mach, and so you get everything you get with Unix. You're getting sockets, and you're getting file system permissions, and all that stuff. Plus, you're getting a bunch of other stuff that's kind of specific to a mobile device like this, like power management and keychain access to kind of manage the security of things. Bonjour, which is this kind of network, finding other things on the network. So it's got all that stuff. It's a very powerful underlying operating system. But all of that API, or most of it, is in C, and we want to be programming kind of purely object-oriented layer. So we're going to be mostly operating, when we're talking about touching those things, at the core services layer. So this layer has things like language, things that kind of make the language more powerful, like arrays and dictionaries and strings and things like that. Plus, it has object-oriented ways to access the file system. It has object-oriented ways to find out the GPS location of your device, for example. It has ways to do multi-threading. All this stuff that you want to be able to do, but you want to stay in an object-oriented kind of mindset as you're doing them all. There's a huge layer, foundational layer there at Core Services for doing that. At the media layer, don't sleep on this layer, really important layer. You got video here, you got video editing, you got images, of course, that it can display. It's incredibly powerful audio for doing 3D audio. If you have games, you can make TIE fighters feel like they're ripping by you and stuff. All that stuff is in here. This is the part of iOS that really I can't cover in a lot of depth. I'm just going to try and let you know that it's there, and you're going to dive down depending on what kind of applications later in your life you want to build. But there's an enormous amount there. This is fundamentally a multimedia device, obviously. And then Cocoa Touch is where we're going to spend most of our time. This is where you are going to be building buttons and sliders and text fields talking to each other, and animation happening, things sliding in and out, and fading out and fading in. If you want to get a picture from the camera from the user, you can do that. Things like localization, so that your app can run in many countries in the world and up your sales by doing that. A whole map kit for doing all the 3D maps that you've probably seen in iOS 7, and all that stuff is all in there. And there's even a view in there that's an entire web browser in a little rectangle that you can just plop right into your app. So these are really high-level objects, and we're going to really be diving into this layer. All right, so this is really the primary thing. It's called Cocoa Touch because the API in here was originally developed for Mac OS X, and it was called Cocoa. And of course, then when they went to iOS, they adapted, and a lot of the API is shared between the two platforms. And in fact, if you develop an iOS app, and then you say someday, oh, I want to develop an app for the Mac using Cocoa, it's going to be very similar. Okay, you're going to be really, it's going to look familiar. So Cocoa Touch obviously is the touchscreen version of Cocoa. Okay, this technology, Cocoa, has been around a long time. Okay, probably almost 30 years, believe it or not, from even before Apple acquired it to make Mac OS, what is now Mac OS 10. And so it's a very mature API. Okay, it's very well thought out. So especially if you go with the flow of it, it's very easy to build really powerful things. So that's what's in there. So let's talk about the tools we use as programmers, as developers, to build these apps, okay? And I've divided those into kind of 4 sections here. One is the tools, the actual programming tools. And what's great on this platform is it's pretty much a one tool fits all, okay? There's this one tool, Xcode 5, and everything's in there. Your debugger's in there, all your source code editing, your source code control, the UI building, everything is in this one app. There's a little adjunct there, instruments, which is for things like profiling your app and things like that, memory usage, those kind of things. But you're really always inside Xcode 5, which is really nice because, you know, when you're debugging, you're usually editing your code at the same time, back and forth, back and forth. You're going to different apps and all that would be a pain in the neck. And they've really done a good job of arranging the screen space so that it's sharing between all these different tasks that you need to do. So that's the primary tool, Xcode 5. You should all, right after this class, if you want, go to the Mac App Store, not the App Store on your iOS device, the Mac App Store on your Mac, and download this. It's free. It's available. Came out last Friday. And you can download it, install it, and start playing around with it. Some of you might have already used Xcode like in CS106. Raise your hand if you've used Xcode before for anything. OK, so 2/3 or more, 3/4 of you. So you're going to be used to it. You're just going to start using Xcode now to develop for iOS. All right. There's a new language for you to learn, Objective-C. It's kind of a funny looking language. Okay, it's got square brackets and colons, no parentheses on message calls, which is kind of weird. For people who are coming from Java or C++ or whatever, the arguments are not put in parentheses or whatever. And I'm going to show you all about Objective-C. I don't expect you to know anything about it coming in. And if you know Java and C++, which you should if you've taken CS106A and B, then Objective-C is not going to be a big leap for you. It's a little bit different language. It's a little more fast and loose than Java, for example. And it's a little more kind of simple and elegant than C++ when it comes to the object-oriented stuff. So I think you'll like it. Some of you who are very correct programming kind of thing, you love Java, might find Objective-C a little Wild West for you, but you'll get over it. Frameworks, obviously any big system like this groups all of its objects into libraries, essentially. We call them frameworks in iOS. So there's dozens of frameworks in iOS. The 2 main ones we're going to look at the beginning of the course are Foundation. That's where all that core services stuff is, like arrays and dictionaries and all that. And then UIKit. Okay, that's where buttons and sliders and all those things are. So those are the 2 main ones. But there's a whole bunch of other ones, like you see the core data written up there. That's the object-oriented database. Okay, so we're going to be doing that. Core motion, that's the gyro and accelerometer. MapKit, obviously the maps. And there's dozens more. Okay, and we'll cover as many of them as we can. Obviously, we can't do it all in 10 weeks, but we'll do as much as we can. And then the last part of developing application on this platform is a design strategy called MVC. Now, this is not unique to iOS. Other platforms use MVC, Model View Controller, as their fundamental design strategy. So how many people in this room have used MVC on any platform? OK, so about half. So you'll know what this is. So I'm actually going to go over MVC for those of you who haven't. And I'll go through pretty quickly because it looks like most of you, half of you have done it. And